Chosen one, you did not stumble into this hour by chance. Heaven does not scatter its summons across random screens and idle scrolls. You are here because the Spirit pulled the thread that has been wound around your days for longer than you have admitted. This is not coincidence. This is not the algorithm. This is not the restless search of a tired mind looking for comfort. This is the appointed pull of the one who marked you before the foundations of the earth were laid. The people who walked past you, the ones who measured your worth by the size of your platform or the speed of your progress, those same people are beginning to turn their heads. Not because you finally performed for them. Because the covering that hid what heaven already knew is lifting, and the light is no longer optional. You have felt the weight of being unseen. You have sat in rooms where your name was spoken last, if it was spoken at all. You have watched doors open for others while yours stayed shut, and you wondered if the delay was evidence against you. It was not. Delay was never denial. Delay was protection. Delay was the slow, deliberate work of a God who refuses to let unfinished clay be put on display before the fire has done its work. The overlooking was never proof that you lacked value. It was proof that the timing of men is not the timing of heaven. And the timing of heaven has shifted. Listen closely. Something in the atmosphere around you has changed. The same faces that once looked through you are now looking again, and this time they cannot look away. They do not understand why. They will call it sudden success or lucky timing or a surprising turn. They will not know that the real change began in the secret place where you kept showing up when no one clapped. They will not know that the oil was being pressed while the world slept. But you know. You feel the difference already. The air itself carries a different weight when you enter a room. Conversations pause half a second longer. Eyes linger. Opportunities that used to slip past your hands now stop and wait. This is not imagination. This is alignment. This is the outward evidence of an inward decree that was spoken over you long before any human mouth ever spoke your name. You are not late. You are not behind. You are not the one who missed the window. The window was never meant to open on their schedule. It was meant to open when the fruit was ready and the roots were deep enough to hold the weight of what is coming. That moment is no longer future tense. It is present. It is this day. It is the hours that stretch in front of you right now. Heaven has marked this season with a different ink, and the people who once dismissed you are reading the handwriting for the first time. There is a sacred window open over your life, and it will not stay open forever in the same way. The book of Ecclesiastes says there is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. That is not poetry for the calendar. That is a declaration about the sovereignty of God over the clock itself. Every delay you endured, every closed door you stood in front of, every quiet season where nothing seemed to move, those were not wasted years. They were the exact measurements of a season that had to finish before the next one could begin. The appointed time has arrived. The vision that seemed to tarry is no longer tarrying. Habakkuk recorded the same truth: the revelation awaits an appointed time, it speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it, it will certainly come and will not delay. You have waited. You have held the word in the dark. You have refused to let go even when the evidence argued against you. That waiting is complete. The certainty of the word is now moving from the page into the open air of your actual days. Feel the shift. It is not loud at first. It is the quiet rearrangement of people and possibilities around the life that stayed faithful when faithfulness looked foolish. The ones who overlooked you did not do so because they were wiser. They did so because they could only see what was visible on the surface, and the surface of your life was still under construction. God saw the finished work. God saw the finished version of you while the scaffolding was still up. And now the scaffolding is coming down in places, and the structure underneath is becoming visible to more eyes than just his. This is the hour when private confirmation turns public. This is the stretch of days when the hidden anointing begins to register on the frequency that other people can finally sense. Do not mistake the sudden attention for the source of your value. The attention is only the echo. The source was always the knowledge God carried about you before anyone else knew your name. He knew the capacity you carried when others measured you by the size of your circle. He knew the depth of the well inside you when others only saw the dry ground of a quiet season. He knew the assignment written on the underside of your life when others filed you under, not yet, or, not quite. That knowledge is no longer sealed. It is being revealed, and the revelation is happening in real time, in the ordinary rooms and ordinary conversations of your ordinary days. The extraordinary is leaking through the ordinary, and people are noticing the leak. You have been carrying something heavier than most people realize. The weight of being chosen is not glamorous in the early years. It is the weight of staying soft when hardness would have been easier. It is the weight of continuing to water ground that looked barren to every observer. It is the weight of refusing to shrink your language or your expectancy just to fit the rooms that could not hold you yet. That weight is now converting into visible substance. The same people who once walked past the quiet version of you are now pausing at the version that can no longer be ignored. They are seeing the fruit of a process they never witnessed. They are tasting the oil of a pressing they never sat through. And the recognition is not coming because you finally became impressive enough. It is coming because the veil that covered the truth is being lifted by the same hand that placed the truth there in the first place. This is the core of what heaven is speaking over you in this hour. The people who overlooked you are finally seeing what God already knew. Not what you hope they will see. Not what you have been trying to prove. What God already knew. The difference is everything. What God already knew does not require your performance to remain true. It does not shrink when the room is small. It does not expand only when the platform is large. It simply is. And now that is becoming visible. The hidden chapters are being read aloud. The private yes you gave in the dark are producing public evidence in the light. The ones who measured you by the unfinished chapters are now confronted with the pages that were written while they were not looking. You feel the acceleration, don't you? The way certain conversations that used to stall are now moving forward. The way certain names that once stayed silent are suddenly speaking. The way certain doors that felt sealed are showing hairline cracks of light. This is not random. This is the outworking of a decree that was spoken over you before you ever knew how to spell the word destiny. God already knew the capacity. God already knew the endurance. God already knew the purity of the yes you kept giving even when the yes cost you more than it seemed to return. And because He knew, He has timed the unveiling for a season when the unveiling itself will serve a larger purpose than your personal vindication. The people who overlooked you are seeing, and their seeing is part of a larger rearrangement that heaven has been orchestrating for longer than any of them realize. Stay steady inside the shift. Do not rush to explain yourself to every new set of eyes. Do not dilute the oil just to make the sudden attention more comfortable for people who are still catching up. The recognition is a byproduct, not the assignment. The assignment remains the same: walk in the knowledge of what God already knew about you, and let the outward evidence arrange itself around that knowledge. The ones who once dismissed you will have their own process of adjustment. Some will celebrate. Some will recalculate. Some will quietly rearrange their earlier conclusions. None of that is your work to manage. Your work is to remain in the frequency of the one who never overlooked you for a single second. The overlooking is ending. The seeing is beginning. And the seeing is not the shallow kind that fades when the next shiny thing appears. It is the kind that settles into the awareness of people who finally understand they were looking at the wrong version of the story. They were reading the early chapters and calling them the whole book. Now the later chapters are turning, and the narrative no longer matches the conclusions they once drew. That mismatch is holy. That mismatch is the evidence that heaven's timeline was never subordinate to human observation. You have entered the stretch of days where private knowing becomes public recognition. The same spirit that sustained you in the quiet is now arranging the quiet into testimony that other mouths will carry. The people who overlooked you are not the final authority on your story. They never were. They are simply the latest witnesses to a truth that was settled in the courts of heaven long before any of them formed an opinion. And the truth is this: what God already knew about you is becoming impossible to ignore. The appointed hour has arrived. The covering is lifting. The recognition is no longer delayed. Walk forward as one who has always been seen by the only eyes that ever mattered, and watch the other eyes adjust to the light that was never turned off, only temporarily veiled until the exact moment heaven chose to reveal it. The overlooking did not wound you because you were weak. It wounded you because you were already carrying something too heavy for the rooms that could not yet hold it. What felt like rejection was the careful fencing of a field that still needed time to ripen. What looked like loneliness was the quiet classroom where heaven taught you to hear the still small voice above the noise of other people's opinions. Every closed circle, every unanswered message, every season when your name stayed off the list, these were not evidence that you had been passed over. They were the exact shape of divine protection. The same hand that kept certain doors shut was the hand that kept certain influences from entering while the foundation was still being poured. You know the nights when the silence felt louder than any accusation. You know the way your own mind rehearsed the reasons you might have been left out. You wondered if the delay meant the promise had expired. You wondered if the misunderstanding meant you had misheard the call. But what looked like loss was investment. What looked like abandonment was the deliberate clearing of space so that when the recognition finally came it would not be mixed with the wrong voices. The people who could not see you yet were never the ones assigned to confirm you. Their blindness was not a verdict on your worth. It was a temporary veil that protected the oil until the vessels meant to receive it were ready. The delay trained your endurance in ways applause never could. The misunderstanding forced you to root your identity in a source deeper than human approval. The loneliness taught you the difference between being alone and being set apart. You were not being punished. You were being prepared. The same seasons that felt barren were the ones in which the root system went deep enough to support the weight of what is now arriving. If the fruit had come earlier, the branches would have broken. If the recognition had arrived before the character was formed, the recognition itself would have become a snare. Heaven refused to let that happen. So the waiting continued, and the waiting was never empty. It was full of the slow work that only silence and obscurity can accomplish. You carried questions that no one else could answer. You walked through rooms where your presence registered as an afterthought. You watched others receive the very things you had been contending for, and the comparison tried to settle in your chest like a stone. Yet every time you almost agreed with the verdict of the overlookers, something inside you refused to sign the papers. That refusal was not stubbornness. It was the Holy Spirit holding the line of truth inside you when the outer evidence looked thin. The preparation was happening in the hidden places, the early mornings when no one saw you pray, the quiet decisions to keep your heart soft when hardness would have been easier, the choice to bless people who never returned the blessing. Those unseen choices were the real curriculum. The public recognition that is beginning to surface is only the report card. What looked like being left behind was actually being held back until the timing matched the assignment. What looked like rejection was the removal of relationships that could not travel with you into the next chapter. What looked like misunderstanding was the filtering process that left only the people who could recognize the oil once it began to flow. None of it was wasted. None of it was random. The pain was the pressure that pressed the olives. The isolation was the wilderness that trained the ears. The delay was the kiln that finished the clay. You are not emerging from failure. You are emerging from formation. And the same people who could not see the formation are now being confronted with the finished work. I remember a night in a small apartment with the lights off and the phone face down on the table. The call I had been waiting for never came. I had asked God why the doors stayed shut when I had done everything I knew to do. I questioned his timing out loud in the dark, voice low so the neighbors would not hear. Tears hit the floor in the space between the couch and the wall. I could smell the leftover coffee from that morning still sitting in the mug on the counter. A family gathering earlier that week had left me smiling on the outside while something inside stayed quiet and heavy. I told him I did not understand the silence. I told him the waiting felt like erasure. Then, somewhere in the middle of that honesty, a quiet knowing settled, not a loud voice, not a dramatic vision, just a steady assurance that the delay was not the end of the story. The phone stayed silent that night. But the next season began to rearrange itself in ways I could not have forced. The same God who let me sit in that dark room was the one who later opened the exact doors that needed to open, at the exact pace my character could carry. The tears were real. The doubt was real. The resolution was quieter than the doubt, but it held. That same resolution is holding for you now. The pain you carried was never the final word. It was the necessary weight that pressed something eternal into the shape of your days. And the people who overlooked you during those years are beginning to sense the difference without fully understanding its source. Their seeing is incomplete, but it is no longer absent. The formation is producing evidence they can no longer dismiss. Isaiah records the word of the Lord saying that he will give you the treasures of darkness and riches stored in secret places, so that you may know that he is the Lord, the God of Israel, who summons you by name. The darkness was never empty. It was the storage room. The secret places held the very substance that is now becoming visible. You were not buried. You were being stocked. The overlooking kept the treasures from being handled by hands that would have mishandled them. Now the season has shifted, and those same treasures are moving into the open. You have read it yourself in Psalm 139, even the darkness will not be dark to you, the night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. The nights that felt impenetrable to your own understanding were already lit for the one who was forming you inside them. He saw the full picture while you could only feel the pressure. That pressure is now converting into visibility. The same God who watched over the process is the one arranging the recognition. Jeremiah received the word that before God formed him in the womb he knew him, before he was born he set him apart. The knowing came first. The setting apart came first. The public assignment came later. Your story follows the same pattern. The people who could not see you were never the ones who defined the calling. Their delayed recognition does not rewrite the original knowing. It only confirms that the original knowing was accurate all along. The book of Romans declares that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who have been called according to his purpose. The all things include the loneliness. The all things include the closed doors. The all things include the seasons when your name stayed unspoken. None of it was outside the working. All of it was being woven into the exact preparation required for the hour that is now unfolding. The good is not a vague future comfort. The good is the present emergence of what was formed in the hidden years. 1 Peter reminds the believers that after they have suffered a little while, the God of all grace will himself restore them and make them strong, firm, and steadfast. The little while felt long while you were inside it. But the restoration is not theoretical. It is already beginning to surface in the way certain rooms feel different when you enter them, in the way certain conversations no longer stall, in the way the same people who once looked past you are now looking again with new eyes. The strength is rising. The firmness is settling. The steadfastness that was forged in obscurity is becoming the platform for what is next. The pain was never the point. The preparation was the point. And the preparation is complete enough for the next movement to begin. The recognition that is arriving is not the reward for surviving the pain. It is the natural result of a process that heaven refused to rush. The people who overlooked you are seeing the fruit of a tree they never watered. They are tasting the oil of a pressing they never witnessed. Their seeing does not validate you. It simply reveals what was already true. Stay in the truth. Let the recognition arrange itself around the work that was finished in the secret place. The formation holds. The unveiling continues. The same God who protected you in the overlooking is the one who is now arranging the seeing, and he will not drop a single detail of what he began. The shift that has begun will not remain subtle. What started as a quiet rearrangement in the atmosphere around you is moving into something more solid, more undeniable, more physical. You will not simply feel different on the inside. The difference will register in the way you carry your shoulders, in the cadence of your speech, in the way rooms adjust when you step through the door. The oil that was pressed in secret is rising to the surface of your actual days, and the people who once looked past you will find themselves unable to look past the evidence any longer. This is not a soft suggestion. This is the next movement of a decree that has already been sealed. The internal work is translating into external weight. Conversations that used to drain you will begin to feed you instead. Decisions that once required long internal debate will settle faster because the frequency inside you has changed. You will notice it in the mirror some mornings, not vanity, not performance, just the quiet recognition that the face looking back carries a steadiness that was not there in the earlier years. The same body that walked through the seasons of being overlooked is now the vessel for a presence that cannot be hidden the same way. The covering is lifting, and the lifting is not only spiritual. It is becoming visible in the ordinary mechanics of how you move through a day. Expect the acceleration to touch more than your private thoughts. Expect it to rearrange the practical order of your life. Opportunities that once required chasing will start positioning themselves in your path. Relationships that had grown thin will either deepen with new clarity or fall away without the same sting, because the capacity inside you has expanded past the need for every old connection. You will walk into certain spaces and sense the difference before anyone speaks. The air itself will feel charged in a way it did not before. This is the physical outworking of an invisible transfer. The anointing that rested on you in the quiet is now resting on you in the open, and the open is beginning to respond. You will not just look different to the people who overlooked you. You will be different in ways that force a recalculation. The old measurements they used, platform size, speed of progress, volume of noise, will no longer fit the person standing in front of them. Something more substantial has taken root. The endurance forged in the hidden years is producing a presence that does not need to announce itself. It simply occupies space differently. And that occupation is already beginning to register on the people who once dismissed the earlier version of you. Their eyes are adjusting. Their language is shifting. Their assumptions are cracking under the weight of what they can no longer ignore. The change is not cosmetic. It is cellular in the spirit. The same spirit that hovered over the formless void is hovering over the next chapter of your life, and the formlessness is giving way to form. You will sense it in the way fatigue loses some of its grip. You will sense it in the way certain fears that used to sit heavy in the chest begin to lose their seat. The body itself will start to carry the testimony of a soul that has been realigned. Sleep may settle differently. Focus may sharpen in unexpected hours. The ordinary rhythms of breathing and walking and speaking will start to feel accompanied rather than solitary. This is the rising. This is the escalation from private knowing to public evidence that cannot be explained away by personality or luck or sudden effort. I was standing on a gravel road outside a small town church after a service that had left me emptier than when I arrived. The sun was low, throwing long shadows across the parked cars. I had asked God why the confirmation never seemed to come in the way I expected. I doubted whether the quiet pull I felt was real or just the leftover hunger of someone who wanted purpose more than he wanted truth. Dust from the road coated my shoes. A breeze moved the dry grass along the fence line. In that moment the doubt felt heavier than the hope. Then a single sentence rose up without sound, clear enough that I stopped walking. The work is already finished in the places you cannot see. No dramatic light. No sudden breakthrough that afternoon. Just the settling of a truth that refused to leave. Weeks later the first real door opened, not because I forced it, but because something in the unseen had already shifted. The gravel under my feet that day became the ground where the doubt lost its final argument. That same finished work is moving in you. The escalation you are entering is not the beginning of the process. It is the visible stage of a process that reached completion in the hidden places first. The physical claims are simply the outer edges of an inner decree that has already been spoken. Genesis opens with the Spirit of God hovering over the waters, and then the command comes, "Let there be light." The hovering preceded the light. The same pattern holds for you. The long season of the Spirit hovering over the unfinished places of your life is giving way to the command that brings visibility. What was formless in the eyes of others is receiving form. The light is not a metaphor. It is the practical illumination of a life that can no longer be kept in the shadows of other people's incomplete assessments. You will find the same truth carried in the book of Exodus when the Lord tells Moses that he has surely seen the affliction of his people and has come down to deliver them. The seeing came first. The coming down followed. Heaven has seen every stretch of your affliction, the quiet kind that does not always look dramatic from the outside. And the coming down is already in motion. Deliverance here is not escape from the assignment. It is the removal of every hindrance that kept the assignment from being recognized. The people who overlooked you were part of the landscape of that affliction. Their delayed seeing is now being interrupted by the same God who saw it all from the beginning. Deuteronomy records the promise that the Lord your God will make you the head and not the tail, and you will only be above, never beneath, if you pay attention to the commands. The positioning is not earned by volume. It is the result of alignment. The years of being treated as if you were beneath the notice of certain rooms are giving way to a new positioning. You will not need to climb over anyone to take the place that has been prepared. The place itself is rising to meet the preparation that already happened inside you. The headship is not arrogance. It is the natural elevation of a life that stayed under the hand of God when elevation looked impossible. Proverbs declares that the path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining ever brighter till the full light of day. The brightness is progressive. It does not arrive all at once in a single flash that blinds. It increases. You are in the increasing. The early light that only you could sense is becoming the fuller light that others cannot miss. The same path that felt dim under the weight of being overlooked is now carrying a brightness that rearranges the attention of the people who once walked past it. The full light of day is not a distant hope. It is the trajectory you are already on. The Gospel of John records Jesus saying that when the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all the truth. The guidance is active. It is not a static deposit of information. It is the ongoing leading into the next layer of what has always been true about you. The Spirit is guiding you out of the old measurements and into the lived reality of what God already knew. The people who overlooked you operated with incomplete truth. The Spirit is now supplying the missing pieces in real time, both to you and, in measured ways, to them. Their seeing is being upgraded because the truth itself is refusing to stay hidden. The escalation is not slowing. The claims are becoming more absolute because the foundation under them has already been tested. You will move differently. You will decide differently. You will occupy space differently. The difference will not require explanation to those who have eyes to see. For those still adjusting, the difference will simply remain, steady and unarguable, until their sight catches up. The rising continues. The physical evidence multiplies. The same God who finished the work in the unseen is now insisting on its visibility in the seen, and nothing that was formed in the dark will be left unfinished in the light. The visibility that is rising will meet you in the ordinary hours, not only in the dramatic ones. Begin with the morning. Before the phone lights up and the demands of the day start their usual procession, take the first quiet stretch and speak the truth out loud in the space where only heaven is listening. Say what has already been settled, that the overlooking is finished, that the recognition is underway, that the work formed in the dark is now moving into the light. Do not turn it into a long performance. A few clear sentences are enough. Let the word settle into your own ears so that the first voice you hear is the one that agrees with God rather than the one that still carries old measurements. Then move through the rest of the morning without rushing to prove anything. Dress, eat, prepare for the day as someone who already carries the weight of a finished inner work. The difference will not always be loud, but it will be present in the way you step into the first conversation or the first task. At work the instruction is the same, occupy the space you have been given without shrinking and without forcing. When the old reflex rises to stay quiet so you will not be noticed, notice the reflex and choose differently. Speak when the moment requires speech. Offer the idea that has been sitting in you. Complete the assignment with the quality that matches the anointing you carry, not the quality that matches the low expectations others once held. You do not need to announce the shift. The shift will announce itself through consistency. When a colleague who once overlooked you begins to ask for your input, receive the request without the old need to over-explain or undervalue what you bring. Simply give what is required and let the evidence stand. If resistance appears, do not interpret it as a return to the former season. Interpret it as the natural friction that comes when a new frequency enters an old system. Stay steady. Do the work. Leave the recalculation to the people who are still adjusting. In family spaces the guidance is quieter but no less concrete. The people closest to you may be the slowest to register the change because they have lived with the earlier version of you for so long. Do not demand that they see what heaven has already confirmed. Instead, let the new steadiness show up in the small exchanges, the way you listen without the old edge of needing to be understood, the way you respond to tension without the old pattern of withdrawal or defense. When a family member speaks from an outdated picture of who you are, you do not have to correct the picture in the moment. You can simply continue being the person the picture no longer fits. Over time the mismatch will do its own work. Your part is to remain present, to keep the heart soft, and to refuse the temptation to perform the new season for an audience that is still catching up. The ordinary conversations around the table or in the car or while handling the daily logistics of life are the very places where the recognition will either deepen or reveal its limits. You do not control the outcome. You only control the integrity of your presence. When difficulty arrives, and it will, because visibility does not erase opposition, meet it with the same clarity. The difficulty is not evidence that the shift has reversed. It is often the pressure that proves the new structure can hold. If an old pattern of rejection tries to reassert itself, name it for what it is, residual noise from a season that has already closed. Then return to the practical next step in front of you. Answer the email. Make the call. Keep the appointment. Cook the meal. Pay the bill. The spiritual reality is not suspended while you handle the natural responsibilities. The two move together. In the middle of the hard moment, resist the urge to rehearse the entire history of being overlooked. That rehearsal only feeds the old frequency. Instead, anchor in the present fact, the work is finished in the unseen, the recognition is already in motion, and your assignment today is to walk out the next obedient step without drama. The body may still feel the stress. The mind may still offer familiar arguments. Let both exist without giving them the final vote. Keep moving. The same practical posture applies to the quiet hours when no one is watching. How you handle solitude now matters as much as how you handle attention. Use the alone time to stay aligned rather than to reopen old wounds for examination. If the loneliness of former seasons tries to return, do not negotiate with it as if it still has authority. Acknowledge the feeling, then redirect the attention toward the truth that the isolation was never empty and is no longer required in the same way. Fill the space with the kind of input that matches the season you have entered, scripture that reinforces the finished work, silence that lets the spirit settle the nervous system, simple gratitude for the evidence that is already appearing. The goal is not to manufacture emotion. The goal is to keep the inner environment clean so that the outer visibility can continue without internal interference. I sat in a hospital waiting room under fluorescent lights that hummed without rest. The chair was plastic and too upright. I had brought a book I never opened. The doubt that day was specific, whether the quiet changes I had been sensing were real or whether I was inventing progress to survive another stretch of delay. A nurse called a name that was not mine. The clock on the wall moved slower than it should have. I asked God, under my breath, if the formation would ever produce anything that other people could actually see. No answer came in the form of a sudden breakthrough. What came was a slow release of the need to force the timeline. I left that waiting room still without the outcome I wanted, but the demand for immediate proof had loosened its grip. Later the proof arrived in ordinary increments, conversations that shifted, invitations that came unforced, a steady sense that the hidden work was no longer hidden in the same way. The fluorescent lights and the plastic chair became the place where the insistence on visible results lost its power to define the process. That same release is available to you in the middle of your own ordinary days. The practical instructions are not a list of spiritual chores. They are the way the finished inner work translates into lived hours. Morning by morning, task by task, conversation by conversation, the recognition continues to surface. You do not have to manufacture it. You only have to refuse to live as if the old season is still in charge. The people who overlooked you will keep adjusting at their own pace. Some will move quickly. Some will resist. Some will remain unchanged. None of their responses alter the decree that has already been spoken over you. Your part is to inhabit the days with the steadiness that matches what heaven already knows. The bridge between what has been declared and what is still to come is this: the daily faithfulness is not separate from the larger unveiling. It is the very ground on which the next stage will stand. Every ordinary choice to stay aligned, every refusal to shrink, every decision to let the evidence speak for itself is preparing the way for a visibility that will not be temporary. The recognition that has begun will deepen. The physical and practical differences that are already registering will multiply. The same God who formed you in the overlooked years is the one who is now arranging the seen years, and he is precise with every detail. Keep walking the ordinary path with the extraordinary awareness that the path itself is being watched over. The next movement is already in motion. The days ahead will carry more weight, more clarity, and more evidence than the ones behind. Stay present inside them. The unveiling does not pause for the mundane. It uses the mundane as its stage. The time for measured language is finished. What is happening in you now will not stay polite or gradual. The same power that formed the hidden work is now insisting on a visibility so complete that the people who once walked past you will find themselves stopped mid-step. You will not merely carry a different presence. The presence will rearrange the room before you speak. Shoulders that once carried the quiet weight of being unseen will straighten under a new authority that does not ask permission. Your voice will land with a weight it never held before. Eyes that used to slide away will lock and stay locked because the frequency radiating from you has changed at a level deeper than personality. This is not improvement. This is transformation that registers in the body, in the breath, in the very air that moves around you when you enter. Expect the physical evidence to multiply without your effort. Sleep will deepen in ways that restore more than rest. Strength will return to places that had grown accustomed to fatigue. The nervous system that once braced for rejection will begin to settle into a readiness that no longer anticipates the old patterns. You will walk into environments that used to diminish you and discover that the diminishing no longer works. The atmosphere itself will yield. Conversations will turn toward you without your steering them. Decisions that once required committee approval will begin to lean in your direction because something in the unseen has already voted. The people who overlooked you will feel the shift in their own chests before their minds catch up. Some will call it coincidence. Some will call it sudden maturity. None of them will be able to explain the sudden impossibility of looking away. This is the hour when the decree moves from the spirit into the marrow. The hands that once hesitated will move with precision. The mind that once second-guessed will cut through confusion with a clarity that feels almost foreign at first. The heart that learned to protect itself in the long silence will open again, but this time under a covering that cannot be breached by the same old dismissals. You will notice it in the mirror and in the way strangers respond before they know your name. You will notice it in the way former gatekeepers lose the power to keep the gate closed. The recognition is no longer optional for them. It is being forced by a reality larger than their previous conclusions. What God already knew about you is now pressing against the surface of every ordinary interaction until the surface cracks and the truth stands in the open. The escalation has reached its peak intensity. The claims are absolute because the foundation under them can no longer be shaken by human opinion. You are not becoming someone new. You are finally being seen as the one you have always been in the eyes of the only one whose vision never failed. The body will testify. The days will testify. The people who once measured you by incomplete data will find their measurements useless. The oil is not dripping anymore. It is pouring. The light is not leaking. It is flooding. And the flood will not ask the overlooked years for permission to rearrange the present. I stood alone on a rain-slick sidewalk outside an office building long after the last lights had gone out. The street was empty except for the occasional car whose headlights turned the wet pavement into brief mirrors. I had stayed late again, not because the work demanded it, but because going home felt like returning to a version of my life that no longer matched the quiet certainty growing inside me. The doubt that night was sharp, whether the inner shift would ever produce a single external door that stayed open long enough to matter. Rain collected on the shoulders of my coat. The smell of wet concrete rose with every step. I told God I was tired of carrying a promise that still looked invisible to everyone else. No thunder answered. No sudden phone call broke the silence. What came instead was a deep, almost physical knowing that the invisibility itself was ending, not later, not someday, but in the movement already underway. I walked to the car with the same unanswered questions, yet the questions no longer owned the final word. Within weeks the first irreversible opening appeared, small at first, then impossible to reverse. The rain and the empty sidewalk became the place where the last argument of delay lost its voice. That same irreversible movement is upon you. The hidden season has reached its appointed close. The long stretch of silence in which you wondered whether anyone would ever see what heaven had already declared is finished. The revealing is no longer a future hope. It is the present reality breaking into the open. Every year that felt buried is now being called up as evidence. Every quiet obedience is now finding its public weight. The people who could not see you are being given new eyes against their previous conclusions, and the new sight will not be temporary. The covering that protected the work has completed its assignment. It is lifting in layers, and each layer removed makes the truth more undeniable. You are standing at the threshold where private formation becomes public fact. The silence that once surrounded your days has been broken by the same voice that spoke the original decree over your life. What was whispered in the dark is being announced in the light. What was protected by obscurity is now being exposed by design. The overlooking has lost its power to define the narrative. The revealing has taken its place, and the revealing will not be rushed or slowed by human preference. It moves according to the timeline written before you ever drew breath. The days ahead will carry the weight of this turn. The recognition already begun will accelerate. The physical and practical differences already registering will deepen until even the most resistant observers are forced to adjust their language. You do not need to strain toward the next stage. It is already advancing toward you. The hidden years have done their work. The open years are taking the field. Stay in the certainty that the same God who kept you in the silence is the one who is now orchestrating the sound of your name being spoken in rooms that once had no place for it. The turn is complete. The revealing continues to unfold, and nothing formed in the secret place will be left unrevealed in the days that follow. The revealing has reached the place where you must now receive it with your own mouth. Do not leave this hour as a spectator. Stand where you are, whether the room is quiet or the day is already moving around you, and speak these words aloud with the full weight of your voice. I am chosen. I am anointed. I am set apart for the work heaven assigned before I ever drew breath. What God already knew about me is now becoming visible. The overlooking is finished. The recognition has begun. I receive the shift in full. Say it again if the first time felt thin. Let the sound of your own voice carry the decree back into your chest. There is power when the mouth agrees with what the spirit has already settled. This is not positive thinking. This is alignment. This is the moment the private yes becomes an open declaration that heaven records and the atmosphere around you begins to rearrange itself to match. Did you feel that shift? Stay with it. Do not rush past the sensation. Some will feel heat in the hands or a sudden settling in the stomach. Some will feel tears that arrive without story. Some will feel nothing dramatic at all, only a quiet click of something finally locking into place. All of it counts. The shift is not measured by the size of the emotion. It is measured by the agreement you just made with the truth that has been pursuing you across every overlooked season. Breathe. Let the words continue to work. The same spirit that hovered over the unfinished places is now hovering over the spoken agreement, and the agreement is being sealed. The blessing that follows is not a single sentence meant to cover everything in general terms. It moves deliberately across the distinct places of your life where the revealing must now take root. Over your provision, the same God who sustained you when the numbers looked impossible is now opening channels that do not depend on the approval of people who once dismissed you. Resources will find you in ways that bypass the old gatekeepers. Debt that felt permanent will begin to lose its grip. Opportunities for increase will appear in ordinary conversations and unexpected places. You will handle money with a new steadiness because the fear of lack no longer sits in the same seat. Provision is aligning with purpose, and the alignment will be practical, measurable, and sustained. Over your relationships, the connections that were meant to travel with you into this season will deepen with fresh clarity and mutual recognition. The ones that could not carry the weight of what you carry will release without the same tearing. Family members who saw only the earlier chapters will begin to encounter the present truth of who you have become. Friendships will reform around honesty rather than old roles. Romantic possibilities, if that is part of your path, will no longer be filtered through the lens of being overlooked. You will be met as you are, not as the diminished version others preferred. Peace will settle into the spaces between people where tension used to live. Over your health and physical strength, the body that walked through the long pressure is now receiving restoration at a cellular level. Sleep will restore more than it has in years. Energy will return to places that had grown used to running on empty. Chronic tensions held in the shoulders, the jaw, the gut will begin to unwind under the same anointing that is lifting the covering from your life. You will notice the difference in the way you move through a day, in the way fatigue no longer claims the final hours. The temple is being strengthened for the weight of the assignment that is now visible. Over your calling and purpose, the work that was prepared in the secret place is moving into its open expression. Doors that stayed shut while the character was formed are swinging on their hinges. Influence will expand without the old striving. The specific assignment written into your days will clarify in practical next steps, conversations to have, projects to begin, places to stand. You will no longer measure the calling by the size of the audience that once ignored it. The calling itself is taking the ground that was always prepared for it, and you will walk it with the authority of one who has already been approved in the courts of heaven. Over your peace of mind, the mental loops that rehearsed every rejection and every delay are losing their power to dominate the inner atmosphere. Thoughts will settle faster. Anxiety that once arrived uninvited will find fewer open doors. The mind will begin to agree with the finished work rather than the unfinished opinions of others. You will sleep without the same review of old wounds. You will wake without the same dread of being unseen. A settled confidence will occupy the places where second-guessing used to live. The peace is not fragile. It is the direct result of a season that has closed and a revealing that has begun. All of these areas are being touched at once because the same hand that formed you in the overlooked years is the hand that is now arranging the open years. Nothing is left outside the reach of the decree. Go in peace. Go in power. Walk into the remainder of this day and the days that follow as one whose hidden season has completed its assignment. The silence that once defined so many of your hours has been broken by design. The recognition that has started will continue until every place that once overlooked you has been given the chance to see. You do not have to force the process. You only have to remain in the agreement you just spoke. If this word has landed in you as truth, type the word Amen in the comments right now as a simple act of faith. Let it be the outward seal of the inward shift. No long explanation is required. Just the word. You were born for this moment, chosen one. God bless you.